At 1,847 hours, on July 31st, 1943, Private First Class Rodger Young lay face down in the kunai grass on New Georgia Island, Solomon Islands, 25 years old, 122 pounds, 5 feet 2 inches tall, nearly blind in his right eye, nearly deaf in both ears, shot through the left shoulder 4 minutes earlier. Blood soaked through his fatigue jacket and pooled in the mud beneath his chest. 30 yards ahead, a Japanese machine gun fired from a pillbox made of coconut logs and packed coral. The gun had pinned down his entire platoon. 15 men lying in the grass behind him, unable to move forward, unable to move backward, unable to do anything except press their faces into the mud and listen to 7.7 millimeters rounds cutting the air above their heads. Young could not see the pillbox clearly. His right eye had been failing for 2 years. His left eye was adequate at short range, but useless beyond 50 yards without his glasses, and his glasses were somewhere in the mud behind him, knocked off when the bullet hit his shoulder. He could not hear the shouts of his squad leader telling him to stay down. His hearing had deteriorated to the point where normal conversation required the speaker to be within 3 feet and facing him directly. The machine gun fire he could hear. That was loud enough. Everything else was silence. Rodger Young was crawling toward the pillbox, alone, wounded, half-blind, nearly deaf. Armed with a rifle, he could barely aim, and grenades he could barely see to throw. He was doing it because 15 men behind him would die if he did not. This story begins 25 years earlier, in Tiffin, Ohio, population 14,000, with a boy who was too small for everything except the thing that mattered most. Rodger Young was born April 28, 1918, in Tiffin, Seneca County, Ohio. His father, Michael, worked at the National Machinery Company. His mother, Margaret, kept the house and raised 5 children. Rodger was the second youngest. The family lived in a small frame house on the south side of Tiffin, in a neighborhood where every man worked at the factory or the railroad or the farms that surrounded the town. Tiffin sat in the flat agricultural heartland of northwestern Ohio. Corn, soybeans, wheat. The Sandusky River ran through the center of town. The winters were brutal, the summers humid. The economy was marginal even before the Depression, and after 1929, it became desperate. Rodger was small. Always small. At age 10, he was the shortest boy in his class at St. Joseph's Catholic School. At 12, the shortest in the entire school. At 14, when he entered Columbian High School, he stood 4 feet 11 inches and weighed 89 pounds. The other boys called him Runt, Peanut, Half Pint. The names weren't always cruel. Some were affectionate, the way small-town boys express fondness through mockery. But the mockery was constant. He compensated with effort. What Rodger Young lacked in size, he replaced with a ferocity of commitment that startled everyone who encountered it. He tried out for the Columbian High School football team in fall 1932, 14 years old, 4 feet 11 inches, 89 pounds. The coach, Glenn DeVault, looked at him and suggested he try the band instead. Young refused. He came back the next day, and the next. DeVault finally gave him a uniform, the smallest one he could find, and it still hung on Young like a tent. Young played end, too small to block anyone, too light to tackle anyone head-on. But he was fast, fearless, and absolutely refused to stay down when hit. Bigger boys knocked him flat on every play. He got up every time. DeVault later said that in 4 years of coaching Rodger Young, he never once saw the boys stay on the ground after a hit. Not once. Young played all 4 years. Never started a game. Never scored a touchdown. Never made the all-county team. But he never missed a practice. Never missed a game. And never quit. He played basketball too. Same story. Too short. Too small. Made the team on effort alone. Sat the bench most games. When he got in, He played with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable to watch. Dove for loose balls, took charges from boys 8 inches taller, fouled out of games because he played so aggressively. The other thing about Rodger Young was his personality. Quiet. Not shy exactly, but reserved. Spoke softly, listened carefully. Dry sense of humor that emerged in small moments, a raised eyebrow, a muttered comment that made the boys next to him laugh. He was well liked. Not popular in the way that athletes and class presidents are popular, but respected in the way that consistent effort and unfailing decency earn respect in a small town. Young graduated from Columbian High School in June 1936, 18 years old, 5 feet 2 inches, 112 pounds. He had grown 3 inches in 4 years, but had stopped growing. 5'2" was going to be his permanent height. He accepted this without complaint, without self-pity, with quiet determination to make whatever he had work for whatever he needed to do. There were no jobs in Tiffin in 1936. Young took odd jobs, worked on farms during harvest season, worked at a gas station, delivered newspapers, saved what he could, which was almost nothing. In January 1938, Rodger Young enlisted in the Ohio National Guard, 19 years old. The enlistment was partly for the money. National Guard soldiers earned $1 a day for drill weekends and $15 a month for summer training. For a young man in Tiffin, Ohio in 1938, that was significant income. But the enlistment was also for something else. Something Young never articulated to anyone, but that everyone who knew him understood. The National Guard gave Rodger Young a place where size didn't matter. Or at least, where size mattered less than willingness. Young was assigned to Company B, 148th Infantry Regiment, 37th Infantry Division. The 37th was an Ohio National Guard division, nicknamed the Buckeye Division. Its members were drawn from small towns across the state. Factory workers, farmers, clerks, mechanics, men who had grown up together, gone to school together, worked together. The unit had the cohesion that comes from shared geography and shared experience. Young thrived in the National Guard. The physical demands were not beyond him. Route marches, calisthenics, obstacle courses. He was small, but he was strong relative to his size, and his endurance was remarkable. He could march all day with a full pack and not fall behind. He could do more push-ups than men who outweighed him by 60 pounds. His will was simply greater than his body's limitations. He was also, it turned out, a natural marksman. The rifle issued to National Guard soldiers in 1938 was the M1903 Springfield, a bolt-action rifle chambered in .30-06. The rifle was 43 inches long. Young was 62 inches tall. The rifle reached nearly to his shoulder when stood on its butt. But when Young lay prone and put the Springfield to his shoulder and looked through the iron sights, something happened. The world narrowed to a single point. His breathing slowed. His hands steadied. The target appeared with a clarity that surprised even the range instructors. Young qualified as expert, the highest marksmanship classification. On his first attempt, he scored 238 out of a possible 250. The average score for the regiment was 187. The range instructor noted in Young's file that PFC Young demonstrated exceptional natural ability with the service rifle and recommended him for competitive shooting assignments. But there was a problem. Young's right eye was deteriorating. He had noticed it first in high school, a slight blurriness that came and went. By 1938, the blurriness was constant. He could still see through the right eye, but fine detail was lost. Reading small print required him to close his right eye and use only his left. For a right-handed shooter, this was a serious problem. Young adapted. He learned to shoot left-handed. He spent hours on the range, retraining his muscle memory, teaching his body to operate the rifle from the opposite side. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and slow. But by the end of the summer training period in 1938, Young was shooting left-handed scores that matched his earlier right-handed performance. The range instructors were impressed. The other soldiers were amazed. Young said nothing about it. He simply showed up at the range, shot left-handed, and collected his targets. Young's hearing was also declining. The onset was gradual. In 1938, he could still hear normal conversation at close range. By 1939, he was asking people to repeat themselves. By 1940, he was reading lips as much as hearing words. He told no one. He did not report the hearing loss to his commanding officer. He did not seek medical evaluation. He knew what would happen if the Army discovered that a soldier in an infantry company was going deaf. They would reassign him. Desk duty, supply, motor pool. Anywhere but the rifle company where Rodger Young had found the only place in his life where he felt he truly belonged. The 37th Infantry Division was federalized on October 15, 1940. The National Guard unit was absorbed into the active Army. The weekend soldiers became full-time soldiers. The men of Company B, 148th Infantry, reported to Camp Shelby, Mississippi, for intensive training. Young was promoted to sergeant. The promotion recognized his marksmanship, his reliability, and the respect he had earned from the men in his squad. As a sergeant, Young was responsible for 12 men. Their training, their discipline, their welfare. He took the responsibility with the seriousness that characterized everything he did. He was a good sergeant. The men in his squad liked him. He never shouted. He never bullied. He led by example, doing everything he asked his men to do, and doing it first. When the squad had to dig foxholes, Young dug his first, and then helped the slowest man finish. When the squad ran obstacle courses, Young went first through every obstacle, proving that if a man his size could get over the wall or through the tunnel or under the wire, then no one else had an excuse. But the hearing was getting worse. By 1941, Young could not hear whispered commands in the field. He compensated by watching hand signals, by positioning himself where he could see the commanding officer's face, by relying on the men closest to him to relay information. The compensation worked in training. In combat, it would be a different matter. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The 37th Division was ordered to prepare for overseas deployment. Training intensified. The division conducted large-scale exercises, simulating jungle warfare, amphibious landings, island assaults. During one of these exercises, in February 1942, Young's squad was assigned to assault a simulated machine gun position. The exercise called for the squad leader to shout commands, coordinating the assault. Young could not hear the commands. He moved when the men around him moved. He fired when they fired. But he was a half-second behind on every action, reacting to visual cues rather than auditory commands. The platoon leader noticed. He pulled Young aside after the exercise and asked if there was a problem. Young said no. The platoon leader asked him directly if his hearing was impaired. Young said no. The platoon leader looked at the small sergeant for a long moment and then let it go. The division was preparing for war. They needed every experienced NCO they could get. The 37th Division shipped out for the Pacific in May 1942. They were deployed initially to Fiji for jungle training. The Fiji deployment lasted nearly a year. During that time, Young continued to serve as a sergeant. His performance evaluations were consistently excellent. His squad consistently ranked among the best in the company. But something was eating at Young. The hearing loss was now severe enough that he could not function as a sergeant in combat. He knew it. He could not hear commands. He could not hear incoming fire accurately enough to direct his men. He could not hear the sounds that infantry sergeants rely on to keep their soldiers alive. The crack of a rifle, telling you the direction of enemy fire. The whistle of incoming mortars. The shout from a wounded man. Young reached a decision in late 1942. He went to his company commander and requested a voluntary demotion from sergeant to private first class. The company commander was astonished. Voluntary demotions were almost unheard of. Men fought for rank. They competed for promotions. No one asked to be demoted. Young explained. He told the company commander about his hearing loss. He told him he could no longer function effectively as a squad leader. He told him that if he remained a sergeant, his inability to hear commands would get men killed. He asked to be reduced in rank so that he could serve as a rifleman, a position where his hearing loss would be less dangerous to others. The company commander argued with him. He offered alternative solutions: a transfer to a support unit, a medical evaluation, a hearing aid. Young refused all of them. He did not want a support assignment. He did not want a medical evaluation that might result in discharge. He did not want a hearing aid that might fail in combat. He wanted to stay in a rifle company. He wanted to fight. He just could not do it as a sergeant. The company commander approved the demotion. Private First Class Rodger Young, formerly Sergeant Young, was reassigned as a rifleman in the same company. The men in his former squad were confused. Some were angry on his behalf, believing he had been punished. Young told them the truth. He explained his hearing loss. He explained his reasoning. The men understood. Some of them had noticed. None had said anything. The 37th Division was committed to the New Georgia campaign in July 1943. New Georgia was part of the Solomon Islands chain, northwest of Guadalcanal. The Japanese had built an airfield at Munda Point. The airfield threatened Allied positions. It had to be taken. The 37th Division landed on New Georgia on July 22, 1943. The landing was unopposed. The Japanese defenders were concentrated around the Munda airfield, several miles inland. The terrain between the beach and the airfield was some of the worst in the Pacific Theater. Dense tropical jungle, rivers and swamps, kunai grass that grew 8 feet tall and cut exposed skin like razors, mud that swallowed men to their waists, heat that exceeded 100 degrees with humidity near 100%. The Japanese had fortified the approaches to Munda with an elaborate system of bunkers, pillboxes, and interconnected trenches. The fortifications were constructed from coconut logs, coral blocks, and packed earth. Some had overhead cover thick enough to withstand direct hits from 105mm artillery. The bunkers were positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire. Young's battalion, the 1st Battalion of the 148th Infantry, advanced toward Munda through the jungle. Progress was measured in yards. Some days, the battalion advanced 200 yards. Some days, 50. Some days, they were pushed back. The Japanese defenders fought with a ferocity that stunned soldiers who had trained for a year but had never faced an enemy that preferred death to surrender. The heat was murderous. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion. They drank their canteens dry by noon and spent the afternoon hallucinating from dehydration. The mud was constant. It filled their boots, their weapons, their food. Weapons jammed. Men fell into sinkholes and had to be pulled out by their comrades. Young functioned in this environment with the same quiet competence he had shown in everything else. He could not hear commands, but in the jungle, commands were rarely shouted. Hand signals, taps on the shoulder, visual cues. The dense vegetation meant that soldiers often could not see more than a few yards in any direction. Communication was physical, not auditory. Young's hearing loss, which would have been a critical liability in open terrain, was less of a disadvantage in the closed, intimate violence of jungle warfare. His eyesight was another matter. Young's right eye was now nearly useless. His left eye required glasses for anything beyond 30 yards. In the jungle, where most engagements took place at ranges under 20 yards, this was manageable. But Young had broken his glasses twice already and had them repaired with tape and wire. One more break, and he would be effectively blind at any distance beyond arm's length. The battalion fought its way toward Munda through the last week of July. By July 31st, they were within a mile of the airfield. The Japanese resistance was stiffening. Every approach was covered by machine guns. Every clearing was a kill zone. On the afternoon of July 31st, 1943, Company B was ordered to advance through a section of jungle toward a ridgeline that overlooked the Munda airfield. The company moved in a column through the kunai grass, following a faint trail. The grass was 8 feet tall on both sides. Visibility was limited to the man directly in front of you. Young's platoon was in the lead. Young was the 4th man in the column. His rifle was an M1 Garand, the standard infantry weapon. 8 rounds, semi-automatic. Young carried 8 clips of ammunition in his cartridge belt, 2 fragmentation grenades on his harness, a canteen, and a first aid kit. At 1,839 hours, the lead man in the column stopped. He raised his fist. The column halted. For 8 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the jungle erupted. A Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun opened fire from a position approximately 75 yards ahead. The gun was firing from a log and coral pillbox positioned at the edge of a small clearing. The pillbox had been invisible from the trail. The Japanese had concealed it with vegetation. The machine gun's field of fire covered the entire trail and the clearing on either side. The first burst killed 2 men instantly. Private Harold Olson, the lead man, was hit in the chest and head. The second man, Corporal Michael Rosen, was hit in the legs and abdomen. He fell into the kunai grass, screaming. The third man dove left into the grass and survived. Young dove right. The machine gun continued firing. Sustained bursts of 6 to 8 rounds, sweeping the trail and the grass on either side. The 7.7 millimeters rounds cut through the kunai stalks like a scythe. Pieces of grass and dirt rained down on the soldiers lying flat in the mud. The noise was deafening. Even Young, with his damaged hearing, could feel the concussive impact of each burst through the ground beneath his chest. The platoon was pinned. 15 men spread out in the kunai grass over about 40 yards, all flat on their bellies, none able to move. The machine gun was firing from a fixed position, sweeping methodically. Every time a man moved, the gunner adjusted. The Japanese had excellent fire discipline. They were not wasting ammunition. They were keeping the Americans pinned while other Japanese soldiers maneuvered to flank them. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Charles Dixon, was about 20 yards behind Young. Dixon was shouting orders. Fall back to the tree line. But his voice was lost in the machine gun fire. The men closest to him heard the command and began crawling backward through the grass. The men farther forward did not hear anything. Young did not hear anything. Young could see the situation clearly, despite his poor eyesight. The pillbox was ahead of him, partially visible through the shattered grass. The machine gun barrel protruded through a firing slit in the log wall. Every few seconds, the barrel would swing left to right, spraying the killing ground. Between sweeps, there was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Not enough time to rise, aim, and fire. Barely enough time to crawl 2 body lengths through the mud. Young began crawling forward. He did not announce his intention. He did not signal to anyone. He did not ask permission. He simply began pulling himself through the kunai grass toward the machine gun, 1 arm's length at a time, dragging his rifle beside him. The distance was approximately 75 yards. In training, a man could crawl 75 yards in about 5 minutes. In mud, under fire, wounded, half-blind, the distance might as well have been a mile. Young crawled for approximately 15 yards before the machine gun found him. A burst stitched the grass to his left. Mud and plant matter sprayed across his face. He pressed himself flatter and waited. The barrel swept past. He crawled again. At approximately 1,843 hours, Young had closed to within 50 yards of the pillbox. He could now see it more clearly. The structure was about 4 feet high, built from coconut logs, stacked horizontally, and held in place with packed coral. The firing slit was approximately 18 inches wide and 6 inches high. The machine gun barrel moved within the slit with a mechanical rhythm. Left to right. Right to left. Pause. Left to right. Young pulled a grenade from his harness. He pulled the pin with his teeth, an action he had practiced hundreds of times in training. He held the grenade, waiting for the right moment to throw. The pillbox was 50 yards away. A fragmentation grenade could be thrown 30 to 35 yards by a healthy man with a full windup. Young was wounded, lying flat in the mud, and could not rise above the grass without being shot. He needed to get closer. He put the pin back in the grenade. That was something they did not teach in training, but combat soldiers learned quickly. He secured the grenade and resumed crawling. At 1,845 hours, the machine gun hit him again. The bullet struck his left shoulder, shattering the collarbone and exiting through the back of his shoulder blade. The impact slammed his face into the mud. For several seconds, Young did not move. The pain was extraordinary. His left arm went numb from the shoulder down. Blood began soaking through his fatigue jacket, mixing with the mud and the sweat. Young was now wounded twice. His left shoulder was destroyed. His left arm was useless. He could still use his right hand, but his right eye was nearly blind. He could barely see the pillbox 35 yards away through his functional left eye, and that eye was now clouded with mud and tears and the haze of shock. He kept crawling. He dragged himself forward with his right arm, pushing with his legs, his left arm trailing behind him like a dead branch. Every movement sent waves of pain through his shattered shoulder. Blood left a dark trail in the crushed grass behind him. The men of his platoon could see what was happening. Some of them could see Young's body inching through the grass toward the machine gun. Private First Class Lewis Coleman, lying in the grass approximately 20 yards behind Young, later testified that he watched Young crawl for approximately 5 minutes after being hit in the shoulder. Coleman said he wanted to go help him. He wanted to drag Young back to the tree line, but the machine gun fire was too heavy. Anyone who moved would die. At 1,847 hours, Young reached a position approximately 25 yards from the pillbox. He was close enough now. Maybe. He pulled the grenade from his harness again, pulled the pin with his teeth. He could not throw with his left arm. It was dead. He would have to throw with his right arm, from a prone position, with no wind-up, at a target he could barely see. Young pushed himself up onto his right elbow. The movement exposed his head and shoulders above the grass. The machine gunner saw him. The barrel swung toward him. Young threw the grenade. The throw was short. The grenade landed approximately 5 yards in front of the pillbox and exploded harmlessly, sending shrapnel into the log wall but not through the firing slit. The explosion momentarily distracted the machine gunner. The barrel stopped sweeping. Young used those seconds. He crawled forward, 10 yards. The machine gun resumed firing. Rounds struck the ground around him. One round hit his rifle stock, splintering the wood. Another round grazed his right thigh. Young pulled his second and last grenade. He was now approximately 15 yards from the pillbox. He could see the firing slit. He could see the dark shape of the machine gun barrel. He could see, or thought he could see, the shape of a man behind the gun. Young pushed himself up onto his right elbow again. His body was a ruin. Left shoulder shattered. Right thigh bleeding. Face covered in mud and blood. His right eye saw nothing but blur. His left eye, through the mud and tears, focused on the firing slit. The machine gunner saw him again. The barrel swung toward him. This time, there was no pause. The gunner fired immediately. The burst hit Young in the chest and head. Multiple rounds. He was killed instantly. But the grenade was already in the air. Young's second grenade entered the firing slit of the pillbox and detonated inside. The explosion killed the machine gun crew. The gun fell silent. The men of Young's platoon heard the explosion. They heard the machine gun stop. For a moment, the jungle was quiet. Then they heard the sound that follows every firefight when one side stops shooting. The sound of their own breathing. The sound of Corporal Rosen moaning in the grass. The sound of nothing where the machine gun had been. The platoon advanced. They passed Young's body lying in the kunai grass, face down, 15 yards from the pillbox he had destroyed. They passed through the clearing and occupied the ridgeline beyond. The path to the Munda airfield was open. Private First Class Rodger Young was dead at 25 years old. He had been in the Army for 5 years. He had served as a sergeant and asked to be demoted so he wouldn't get anyone killed. He had crawled 60 yards through machine gun fire with a shattered shoulder, a nearly blind right eye, and damaged hearing, to throw 2 grenades at a fortified position. The second one, entering a firing slit 18 inches wide, from a distance of 15 yards while he was being shot to death. His body was recovered the following morning. He was buried initially in a temporary military cemetery on New Georgia. The grave was marked with a wooden cross and his dog tags. Word of what Young had done spread through the battalion immediately. The men who had been pinned down told their story. Lieutenant Dixon wrote the initial report. The report moved up the chain of command. Company level, battalion level, regiment level, division level. On February 5th, 1944, the War Department announced that Private First Class Rodger Young would receive the Medal of Honor posthumously. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty." On the 31st of July, 1943, the infantry company of which Private First Class Young was a member was ordered to make a limited withdrawal from the battle in the New Georgia campaign. As the platoon to which he belonged began to move back, the enemy opened fire with a well-camouflaged machine gun, which covered the route of withdrawal. Seeing that the platoon could not maneuver or withdraw as long as this machine gun was in operation, Private First Class Young, although already wounded, began a one-man assault on the gun. Despite his wounds, he crawled to within a few yards of the gun and threw 2 grenades, one of which landed in the emplacement and destroyed the gun. He was fatally wounded. The medal was presented to Young's parents, Michael and Margaret Young, at a ceremony in Tiffin, Ohio. The entire town attended. Columbian High School let out early. The National Machinery Company gave its workers the afternoon off. People who had known Rodger Young as a boy, as the runt of the football team, as the quiet kid who never complained, stood in line to shake his parents' hands. Michael Young accepted the medal in its blue leather case. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said something that the Tiffin newspaper recorded. He was always too small for everything, but he never let that stop him. The story of Rodger Young might have ended there. A Medal of Honor, a hometown ceremony, a name on a memorial wall. But in 1945, the Infantry Journal commissioned a ballad honoring an infantryman who had received the Medal of Honor. The assignment went to Frank Lesser, a songwriter who had already written several popular songs for the military. Lesser chose Rodger Young as his subject. The resulting song, The Ballad of Rodger Young, was released in 1945. The lyrics told the story of Young's final action on New Georgia in simple, direct language. "Oh, they've got no time for glory in the infantry. Oh, they've got no use for praises," loudly sung. But in every soldier's heart in all the infantry shines the name of Rodger Young. The song became one of the most popular military ballads of World War II. It was played on Armed Forces radio. It was sung in barracks and training camps across the country. For a brief period in 1945 and 1946, Rodger Young was one of the most famous soldiers in America. The song endured longer than anyone expected. It was taught in schools through the 1950s. It was included in military songbooks for decades. Veterans of the Pacific Theater sang it at reunions well into the 1990s. But the song was not the only legacy. The details of Young's life, the details that preceded his death on New Georgia, carried a weight that the song could not fully express. Consider the voluntary demotion. Rodger Young was a sergeant. He had earned his stripes through years of service, excellent performance, and the respect of his men. Sergeants in the infantry are the backbone of the Army. The rank carries authority, responsibility, and a modest increase in pay. For a man from a poor family in Tiffin, Ohio, the extra money mattered. Young gave it all up. He walked into his company commander's office and asked to be reduced in rank because he knew his hearing loss made him a danger to his men. He did not make excuses. He did not blame anyone. He did not seek sympathy. He simply stated the facts and asked for the demotion. This act required a specific kind of courage that is rarely discussed in military history. It was not the courage of the battlefield, the adrenaline-fueled bravery that propels men forward under fire. It was the courage of honest self-assessment, the willingness to look at yourself without illusion and acknowledge your limitations. It was the courage of putting other people's lives ahead of your own pride. It was, in many ways, a more difficult act than the one that killed him on New Georgia. The grenade throw lasted seconds. The decision to give up his stripes lasted the rest of his life. Consider also the physical limitations. Young was 5 feet 2 inches tall and 122 pounds. He was nearly blind in one eye. He was nearly deaf. These were not minor handicaps. Any one of them should have disqualified him from infantry service. Together, they should have made him unsuitable for any combat role. The Army had minimum height requirements. The Army had vision requirements. The Army had hearing requirements. Young met none of them by 1943. He stayed in a rifle company because he wanted to fight, not because he was bloodthirsty or reckless or seeking glory, because he believed it was his duty. Because the men in Company B were his family. Because he had spent 5 years training for this, and he was not going to be pushed aside because his body was failing. Young's body was eventually moved from the temporary cemetery on New Georgia. After the war, the Army offered families the choice of having their loved ones returned to the United States or interred permanently in overseas military cemeteries. Michael and Margaret Young chose to have Rodger brought home. Private First Class Rodger Young was reinterred in McPherson Cemetery in Clyde, Ohio, near Tiffin in 1948. The grave is marked with a standard military headstone, white marble, engraved with his name, rank, unit, and dates. Below the dates, a small gold medal is engraved, the Medal of Honor. Tiffin honored Young in multiple ways. A street was named after him. The local American Legion post was named the Rodger Young Post. The VFW post held annual memorial ceremonies on the anniversary of his death. Columbian High School displayed his photograph in the entrance hall. In 1946, the Army named a transport ship the USAT Sergeant Rodger Young, using his highest achieved rank. The ship served as a troop transport in the post-war period. The naming was unusual. Transport ships were typically named after generals or battles, not privates. The choice reflected the national recognition that Young's story had achieved. Robert Heinlein, the science fiction writer, named the troop transport ship in his 1959 novel Starship Troopers, the Rodger Young. Heinlein was a Navy veteran of World War II and had been deeply moved by Young's story. The Medal of Honor that Michael Young accepted on behalf of his son was eventually donated to the Seneca County Museum in Tiffin. It sits in a glass case alongside photographs of Young in his Army uniform, his high school yearbook page, and a copy of the citation. The display is modest. A small case in a small museum in a small town. Most visitors to Tiffin do not know the museum exists. But there is a difference between Rodger Young and other Medal of Honor recipients. Young did not survive. He did not go home. He did not tell his own story. Everything we know about him comes from other people. From his parents, his teachers, his fellow soldiers, the official military records, the lyrics of a song written by a man who never met him. Young's interior life, his thoughts, his fears, his reasons for doing what he did. These are lost. We can infer. We can speculate. We can read his actions and try to understand the man behind them, but we cannot know. Young died in the kunai grass at 25 years old, and whatever he was thinking in those final minutes died with him. What we know is this. A boy too small for football played 4 years without missing a game. A soldier too deaf to lead a squad gave up his rank rather than risk his men's lives. A rifleman too blind to see his target crawled 60 yards through machine gun fire to throw a grenade through an 18-inch slit. We know that Rodger Young never stopped. Not when he was knocked down on the football field. Not when his eyes failed. Not when his ears failed. Not when a bullet shattered his shoulder. Not when a second burst hit his chest. He stopped only when his heart stopped, and by then the grenade was already in the air. The men of Company B, 148th Infantry, 37th Division, walked through the gap that Rodger Young created with his body. They walked over the ridgeline. They walked toward the Munda airfield. They walked because a man who couldn't see, couldn't hear, and weighed 122 pounds had decided that their lives were worth more than his. At 1,847 hours, on July 31st, 1,943, Private First Class, Rodger Wilton Young lay face down in the kunai grass. Behind him, 15 men. Ahead of him, a machine gun. In his right hand, a grenade. In his left arm, nothing. The shoulder was destroyed. The arm was dead. He could not see the firing slit clearly. He could not hear the shouts of his platoon. He could feel the mud beneath his chest and the blood soaking through his jacket and the weight of the grenade in his hand. He pushed himself up on his right elbow. The machine gun barrel swung toward him. He threw the grenade. The throw was perfect. The grenade entered the firing slit and detonated inside the pillbox. The machine gun fell silent. 15 men behind Rodger Young were still alive. Rodger Young was not. He was 5 feet 2 inches tall. He weighed 122 pounds. He was nearly blind. He was nearly deaf. He was the smallest man in his company and the largest thing that ever came out of Tiffin, Ohio. They wrote a song about him. They named a ship after him. They put his medal in a glass case in a museum that most people will never visit. But the men who walked through the gap he made, the men who lived because he died, they did not need a song or a ship or a medal to remember. They remembered every day for the rest of their lives. They remembered the small soldier in the kunai grass who crawled toward the thing that was killing them. They remembered Rodger Young,